Inside the Birds is back. What's up, everybody? It's Geoff, Mosher, and Adam Caplan, and we've brought back Greg Cosell. This is part 2 of our 4-part series looking at NFC East teams. We did the Washington Commanders in part 1, and now we move on to the New York Football Giants here in the second installment of this 4-part series. Greg Cosell, welcome back. You ready to talk about what I think is a very interesting team, the New York Giants? They were last year, and they made a lot of additions. And this is sort of one of those crossroads things where this franchise can really start to get right and take another step. But I also don't. I think that there's a segment of people who think that the Giants don't necessarily have all it takes to make a big jump and could even go backwards. We'll see. When you look at them big picture, what stands out about the New York Giants to you?
Well, big picture before we start getting into the weeds a little bit is I think you have to assume, based on the offensive coaching staff, that there will be continued development of Daniel Jones and that there will be a more expansive passing game based on that, because they didn't really have an expansive passing game a year ago. So that's number one. And number two, on the defensive side of the ball, we all know about Wink Martindale, and I think you're going to see a further expansion of his approach, which is pressure and man coverage. And again, as I said, we'll get into more specifics, but I believe that's one reason why they chose their first round pick, and we'll get to that. But sure, I think you're going to see an expansion of things because of the coaching staff. I mean, to me, I've always been a big believer in coaching, and I think you're dealing with a pretty high level staff.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, we talked about this last year when they hired Martindale, and right after hiring Dable, we felt that the Giants took a big step forward as far as getting the direction, the trajectory of the franchise correct just by having the right type of coaches in place.
Yeah, I thought they would overachieve. I told people when the over-under was 7.5 wins, I said, they're going to be better than you think, because coaching matters. And you could take a very average roster, which they had last year, and be a little bit better than people expect. Now, the roster's better on both sides of the football. We'll get into that. And this is another team, man. This division, it could be a little bit better than people think. We'll see. But on paper, I like what the Giants did this offseason.
By the way, you reminded me, I have to cash up because I did make a friendly steak dinner bet, I think, with a friend of mine who's a beat writer over in New York who covers the Giants. He thought I was insane. I agreed with you. I took the over on 7.5. I didn't place any weight. I just said I think that they were going to beat that. And he thought I was insane. He thought they'd be no better than 4 or 5 wins. They had that by week 9, by the way. Didn't they start off 7-2 or something like that? So
started off very well, yeah.
Yeah. So I was eating good by middle of the season. I got to cash up on that bet. Speaking of Inside the Birds, of course, is presented by Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. It's the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. So let's get into the offense, Craig, and Daniel Jones. You brought him up. Daniel Jones is someone who you would tell us, even in the lean years, you thought you saw some positives there. You would go through his third downs and you would, give us some notes. So what did you think overall of his play last year? What jumped out at you?
I thought he played pretty well. I mean, it was clear offensively that they did not want to ask him whether it was a function of him or other things. That's something you just don't know. But that they did not want him to be the driving force of the offense throwing the football. Now, he's a very good runner, and there were games in which they used his running ability with design runs to be a big factor, because he's far more mobile than people might think. And there were games in which his running ability was a huge factor. But it was clear that as he had to learn a brand new system, and Dable, with his background, he has a pretty expansive pass offense with a lot of intermediate and vertical elements. They just didn't have those kinds of receivers. But again, we don't know if it's the receivers. We don't know if it's Jones having to learn a new system. We don't know the reasons exactly why, but the tape told you that they were not really expansive on offense. But I will tell you this, Jones was still pretty good on third down last year because he makes throws. He's tall in the pocket. He stands there. He delivers the football. He's not afraid to take hits. He can make throws late in the down. He's gotten a bad rap over these last couple of years. I mean, up until last year, obviously, when it was clear that he played well within what he was asked to do. But there's more there. He throws a good ball, by the way. Daniel Jones throws a really nice ball, and he is big and he's physical. So I'm expecting him to take another step forward because I've heard really good things about, how smart he is, how he works at it. You'd have to believe he's going to take another step within the context of the Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka offense.
So Greg, last year it was a struggle for the receiver group. They
Yep.
had a lot of guys hurt. They had no depth, and in fact, Isaiah Hodgins comes out of nowhere, claimed off waivers and did a nice job. So
Became their number one receiver.
yeah, but that's the process of elimination. They didn't have anyone else, but did a good job. So we'll get
No, he did.
Slayton's back. He'll make over $5 million this season. Paris Campbell, he's a guy's had a lot of injuries, but he was relatively healthy last season. Shepard is back. Who knows how healthy he'll be? Wando Robinson's back from the ACL. And Jalen Hyatt, want to talk about him, Greg. So this receiver group with Darren Waller in the trade, Daniel Bellinger, what do you think of this pass target group overall?
Well, I think the Waller deal is really, really important because he can line up anywhere in your formation. I mean, I spent time at the combine. We all spend time talking to coaches. And one of the things that keeps coming up when you talk to offensive coaches, and particularly receivers coaches, is the absolute value to an offense of a tight end who can be effective lining up as the boundary X, the single receiver to the short side of the field, where there's 3 wide receivers to the wide side of the field. Darren Waller can do that. Because don't forget, Darren Waller was a wide receiver in college. Now, he can move, as we know. So I think that move is really, really important to the Giants. Because not only can he do that, but he can line up anywhere in your formation. I think that a wild card here, because he's very gifted and has flashed in his career, is Paris Campbell. He's just been hurt a lot. But Paris Campbell is 6'2", about 205 pounds, and he can run. And I think he's another guy. You can play him in the slot. You can play him outside. He's really good on those shallow crossers, on those short routes, run after catch. He's just been hurt a lot. And again, we don't know the answer. He's a bit of a wild card. I'm sure they're expecting Wan'Dale Robinson, big things from him. He got hurt last year, but he was a second-round pick, and he's one of those kind of interior slot, juicy kind of receivers. He's more quick than fast, but he gives you a lot, and you can also use him in the jet sweep game, in the screen game. He gives you a lot in that regard. Now, I will say this. I would expect, and this is my sense of the evaluation, I would not expect Jalen Hyatt to be a major factor in their offense this year. I think he's going to have a lot to learn. Yes, he can run. There's no question he can run, and he can get on top of the defense. And there may be specific situations where they put him out there to run, 1 or 2 routes. But I don't think, just my personal feeling based on tape study, I don't think he's going to be a big factor, particularly early in the season.
Does that favor? Because there's a lot of wide receivers here when you look at the competition.
They have Jamison Crowder too.
Right. Does this favor Darius Slayton, you think, as one of the few guys who has shown that he can take a top off of defense in a different way? But I mean, he has made downfield plays against the Eagles before. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think Slayton and Hyatt are in a sense similar stylistically, and I think Slayton's going to play ahead of Hyatt without question early in the season. He's been there. Look, last year the 3 receivers last year down the stretch were Hodger, Slayton, and James. And James, I forget where he signed. He's not with the Giants anymore. But those were the 3 receivers. So Slayton has played in this offense.
Interesting. I want to go back to something you said on Daniel Jones. I think there were really impactful words that sometimes can get lost in the sauce. You said he stands tall in the pocket. As good quarterbacks do. And I think that's I don't want to say it's a rare trait, but I just started noticing over the last few years, Greg, watching tape, is that there are certain quarterbacks who, once they feel that pinch, they get a little bit lower. Their eyes, we talked about getting down, maybe even Jalen Hurts 2 years ago, where your eyes start to get down,
Yep.
your body crouches. You see a quarterback in Daniel Jones who stands tall. Explain what you mean when you say stands tall.
Well, first of all, he's 6'5", so he kind of is straight up in just his build, so when he drops back and you see him in the pocket, he looks like a big guy. He is a big guy, and he looks like a big guy on tape, and he's not one to break down instantly by any means. Now, we know he can run, but and my guess is this would be my guess. I would bet last year they told him it was okay to run, but I think that he's the kind of guy, just innately, that he's plays quarterback. He's going to drop back, and he's going to let it all happen, and he's going to make late in the down throws. He's going to wait for that. And I think that's the kind of quarterback he ultimately is. And I think that's a really positive trait. To me, this is a really important year for Jones. Obviously, he signed the big contract. He's not going anywhere. So when I say it's an important year, I don't mean, he's either going to be with the Giants or not. Obviously, he is going to be. But I think it's an important year in his next stage of development with his second year with Dable and Kafka, because I think he has traits to be a quality quarterback. Everybody gets caught up, in lists. Well, is he a top 10? Is he a top this? Or, he's a 6'5" guy with a good arm, who's smart kid, and he has mobility. So if he reaches his ceiling, take that for what it's worth. He can be a really solid quarterback in this league.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, when we look at their offense, we know Barkley's their unquestioned starting running back.
Yep.
Everyone just assumes he's a great player, and we want to get him in second. But how does their total offense, does it work through Jones's arm? Is it through Barkley? When you take a macro view, what's their philosophy?
It's a great question, Adam, because Barkley's a fascinating guy to me, has been since I watched him at Penn State. And Geoff, you're a Penn State guy. Barkley is as explosive a back as there is in the league. But I always felt, and this is purely from tape study, so if people are listening, this is not a personal, this is an evaluation based on watching tape, as I'm looking at my screen as if people can see it. It's a, I don't think at his core he's a true sustainer. I don't think Barkley, and even when I watched him at Penn State, I felt this way. He's powerfully built, no question. I mean, the guy looks like Tarzan. But I don't know if stylistically he's a true sustainer. I think he's much more of a big playback. So, again, will the offense theoretically run through him to a large extent? Of course, it will. It's not as if you're going to give him the ball 6 times a game. But I just don't know, when you think of those backs that, hey, when it's blocked for 3, they get 8. I don't know, despite just his physical build, if Barkley is ultimately that kind of runner. Geoff, weigh in. I know you've been watching him, being a Penn State guy. I just don't think the tape reflects that.
No, I think his vision is definitely something to call into question. It was early in his career. I would watch tape on him his first year with the Giants when he had 2,000 yards. Right. And I would see some runs, like you said, Greg, where he got the hole, hit it right, and bam, he was off to the races. So he got 86 yards on that run.
Which he can do on any play, obviously.
Right, but others where he just didn't follow the blocking scheme, or he went into the wrong. It's almost like he was so fast and so athletic that he didn't let the natural student of the game traits kind of come in. But he's a bright kid. He's a smart kid. It's not, has nothing to do with that. It's just it's just having that feel. And, Miles Sanders, and I don't know if it's a Penn State thing and how they do their offense. We felt that way about Miles Sanders early in his career.
He got so much better the last 2 years at being more of a sustainer, where, because you know what? I learned this from Merrill Hodge. He grew up with the Steelers, and obviously the Steelers always had that sense of being tough and all that, and one of the things he always talked about, because I think Joe Green was on the staff when Merrill first got there, and he would say that Joe Green would pull him aside and say, hey, this is the NFL. 1 yard matters. You get that yard. You're not trying to do more than that. When that yard is there, you get it, because those yards matter. And I think, again, maybe Barkley will never be that guy, because that could be just innate mentally the way he plays out. But again, I'm not trying to say he's not a good back, because he can go, as you said, Geoff, he can go 80 yards anytime.
Right. And by the way, we talked about the run game and how the offense functions. I think it's notable, that the offensive coordinator came from Kansas City. He's a pass guy, right? West Coast guy, Andy Reid guy. And then the head coach himself was coming from Buffalo, where they were throwing the ball around with Josh Allen. It's pretty notable to me that.
But just to interrupt real quick, but Dable also has experience with Nick Saban in Alabama. When Alabama was a running football
when they
team.
were a running team, right?
Yeah.
No doubt about it. His is more balanced. But I thought it was notable last year that toward the end of the year in the playoffs, Saquon Barkley only got 9 carries against Minnesota in a game they won, and then he only got 9 carries, of course, against the Eagles. Now they were down, so you could say they had to abandon it against the Eagles because they were down. But in a game against the Vikings that they won on the road, Saquon, right? That was a road. Yes, on the road. Yes. Saquon Barkley only got 9 carries. Yeah. It seems like they were intentionally getting the offense to go through Daniel Jones by the end of the year anyway.
Because I think that Dable ultimately, with his NFL experience, understands that in this league, that to be a champion, that your offense must run through your quarterback, not your running back. Now, that doesn't mean, again, we're not going to get into this debate now about the value of running backs, but ultimately your quarterback has to be the driving force if you want to reach the promised land.
Definitely. And interestingly, behind Saquon Barkley, Matt Breida, they drafted Eric Gray in the 5th round. Gary Brightwell,
back, by the way, I really liked Eric Gray coming out of Oklahoma. So, again, we don't know how all that's going to play out. You have to go through training camp for that, but I really liked Eric Gray.
Awesome. All right. We will move on from the offense there, that Giants offense. We'll get into the defense in a second. I want to remind everybody it's Ocean Casino Resort's 5th birthday this summer, and they can't wait to celebrate with you. So join Ocean for exciting promotions and sweepstakes, headline entertainment, the best day life and nightlife lineup in AC, the debut of the birthday bar, exclusive local collabs and partnerships, commemorative 5th birthday merchandise, and so much more. Don't miss stunning fireworks and unique events all summer long. Ocean Rewards members will enjoy over $5 million in gifts and prizes. So be sure to sign up for an Ocean Rewards card to get in on the fun next time you visit. All right, Giants defense took a major step forward next year. Adam,
one quick point, Geoff, before you do that. I think Evan Neal needs to play better at right tackle.
Oh, you know what? We
probably
forgot that. Yeah, let's do the offensive line. Go ahead, Evan Neal.
I think Evan Neal, one of the things that he really struggled with last year, which was somewhat evident on his tape at Alabama, and I'll be the first to admit I didn't make as big a note of this as I should have. But he really struggled in his vertical pass sets. And by the way, this could be a reason they played a certain way on offense, because you don't want to get caught up offensively and constantly having to help your tackles, okay? Because then you're losing eligible receivers as part of your offense, and no offensive coach wants to start losing eligible receivers. Okay, coaches want to send 5 out, but anyway, he really struggled on his vertical pass sets at the top of the arc. Balance, body control, he would get beat a lot, and that's a problem. So he needs to be better at the right tackle position.
Greg, one thing is that before we get to defense, I know the Giants feel like they have a lot of depth. They had a lot of guys hurt last season, but Thomas, you mentioned Neal, John Michael Schmitz, who should be their starter at center. They got Bredesen Azudu. I know they love. Unfortunately, he was hurt last season. Mark Lewinsky's there, so coming over from the Colts for a second year.
Who do you say that they love?
Josh Azudu.
Oh, I loved him coming out of North Carolina. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah,
I thought he could be a starting player for sure.
Yeah. So overall, if just assuming everyone's healthy, what do you think of this line?
They have a lot of depth now. Because they signed Phillips, who started meaningful games for the Baltimore Ravens. They still have Lemieux. I mean, you mentioned Azuda. I don't think Matt Parrott has become what they were hoping he'd become, but he's still there, and he was a 3rd-round pick, and he has traits. I remember watching him coming out of UConn. So now, it's an offensive line that should be good and that has some depth. So we'll see how it all plays out. But you're right. They definitely want John Michael Schmitz to start at center. That's why they drafted him in the 2nd round. Lewinsky's been a solid pro. He's a solid guard. The key, Neal to me is one of the absolute keys here, because you do not want to get into 3rd and 9 and have to help Evan Neal.
If Azudu winds up becoming a starting caliber player, Greg, for the Giants, does he take over for Lewinsky or Bredesen?
I would think Bredesen, but Adam, you may have a better answer for that.
That I don't know. They have so many players. Like if you look at the guys that were hurt, right? Parrott was hurt. Azudu was hurt. Guys behind those guys were hurt, but they have like 13 or 14 players that just kind of keep these guys on the field. We actually talked about that, Geoff, if you remember, in season. We were going with the Giants situations. They just couldn't keep any guys healthy. But Greg's right, though. We'll move to the other side of the ball in a minute. Evan Neal is the whole story here. He's got to play at least average football for them to be a solid offense.
Yes, and we'd be remiss if we don't mention that the Giants do have Jack Anderson, the former Eagles interior offensive lineman that, once we thought would be another Stoutland project, but he's there as well, competing to be in the mix. Yep. All right, let's move over to defense. We'll start, of course, with the defensive line. Giants D-line, which they just recently, I believe, got an extension done with one of their emerging players. That's Dexter Lawrence. So let me ask you this, Greg. Dexter Lawrence, is he what the Eagles hope Jordan Davis will become?
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah, because, you're dealing, Dexter Lawrence weighs 340 pounds and moves exceptionally well. He's a power player and he's a quickness player. And he had as good a year last year, maybe, as any D tackle in the league. So yes, that's what you're absolutely hoping for if you're an Eagles fan, that Jordan Davis becomes Dexter Lawrence, because Dexter Lawrence Dexter Lawrence last year was not only a factor in the run game, but he was rushing the quarterback.
Mm.
And by the way, he played, I don't know the number of snaps he played for the season, but I bet he played 60 snaps a game. And obviously that's what you want Jordan Davis to do when you trade up and get him with the 13th pick in the draft.
Right. And he was not like that as a rookie, right? I mean, Dexter Lawrence was not a pass rusher.
No.
Okay.
He's developed over time. Yes.
Okay.
But he always had, I mean, in some ways, like Jordan Davis, I remember when Lawrence came out of Clemson, everybody talked about how light his feet were for a man that size, just as they do with Jordan Davis. So that's what you're kind of hoping for.
Sure.
Greg, there's a guy on their defensive line, and I could not believe this contract. Raheem Nunez-Roches, who comes over from the Bucs.
Oh, yeah. He's been a solid player.
I know. All right, so he's going to make $5.5 million. Not Nacho's his nickname. What do you know about this?
Yeah, no, he's a really solid interior player. He's been with a couple of teams. And you know what? He always shows up on film. He's not a guy you're going to play 65 snaps, but when you play him, he shows up. He's a really good rotational interior D lineman. I thought that signing and the signing of A'Shawn Robinson, two probably somewhat under the radar signings, Adam, were just really solid. You know how every team on the inside needs those kinds of players? You know, look, it's when the Eagles last year had to go get Linville Joseph. You know, those kinds of players, while they don't play, 50, 60 snaps and they're not sack artists, which is what everybody thinks about with defensive linemen, you need those kinds of players. And, A'Shawn Robinson, I remember the Rams Super Bowl season. A'Shawn Robinson was with came from the Rams, and he was a really, really good player for them. I just remember because I watched probably every Rams game on both sides of the ball the year they won the Super Bowl, and you would just notice Robinson all the time, making plays in the run game or eating up blocks. You need those kinds of players. That was a really, really good signing.
Jeff, we should call Nunez-Roches a kid. He just turned 30 and he's making $5.5 million this season.
Well, he's younger than me, so he's a kid.
Yeah, not all of us. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, Greg, today, because I know Wink switches up his fronts and he does a whole lot of different things, but are they? Because you've got Leonard Williams, who's a very good interior guy as well. So, do they run a 5-2 type or a 5-1, 5-2 front? Because I have to think that Williams, Lawrence, A'Shawn Robinson, and then two overhang guys, right? Thibodeau and
yeah. I mean, in their base front, they'd probably have a 5-man front because Thibodeau is going to be on the ball,
right?
So he does a lot of things, and he really does a lot of things out of his sub packages, and certainly on third down.
Yeah.
And that's one reason I thought that the drafting of Deonte Banks in the first round was so critical, because he wants to play a lot of man coverage, because he wants to have a lot of flexibility with his pressure schemes. And when you can play man coverage, line up on the outside and play man, then you can have increased flexibility with your pressure schemes. And Deonte Banks was as good a man coverage corner, a press man coverage corner, as there was in this 2023 draft.
Sure. Even went higher than Christian Gonzalez.
Gonzalez was too. Yeah. The kid the Bears drafted from the U. Stevenson was another man coverage corner, press man. These guys play with swagger. I mean, anytime you can watch Big Ten corners this past year, because they play Ohio State, and you get the matchup against Harrison or Ibuka, which Banks had numerous snaps against those guys, you really get excited about watching that, because you're going to see the best against the best, and Banks clearly more than held his own.
How about pass rushers? I don't before we get back into the secondary, because you did bring up Kayvon Thibodeau. Ojulari was hurt a lot last year.
He's an important piece to this.
Yeah.
I think he can be a really good pass rusher. He's got tremendous arm length. And he uses it really, really well. He's a little different pass rusher than Thibodeau. Thibodeau, to me, is more speed to power. His game is built on get off. He kind of then he wins speed to power. But Ojulari, to me, can bend a little better than Thibodeau. I think he has more flexibility. I think he has a little more of what we call that motorcycle lean, and then he's capable of flattening his rush path and closing with speed to the quarterback. So, I think those two guys are absolutely critical to this defense, and Ojulari in particular, because he was hurt. So we really haven't seen Ojulari that many snaps in the context of a Wink Martindale defense.
Greg, they're paying their off-the-ball linebackers. Karake's making a ton of money.
He's a good player.
Yeah, he's going to make $10 million a year. And a guy I know they loved last summer, they tore his ACL in training camp, was Darian Bieber, who's got really good size, I think, at UC.
University of Cincinnati came out. He's like 6'5", 255 pounds. He's probably a Wink Martindale kind of player because he can do an awful lot of things. Yeah, I'm really curious to see him. He's not an explosive athlete, but he's long. He is athletic for his size. And he can do a lot. You see, Wink Martindale likes these front seven guys, Adam, as you well know. You've spoken to him, but I can see it from tape when he was in Baltimore. He likes a lot of these guys to be very versatile in how you can align them within your defense and what you can ask them to do. Beavers kind of fits that.
Jared Davis, what's his role going to be? They brought him back.
Great, but Jared Davis is, to me, one of the most intriguing guys over these last number of years, because when you watched him at the University of Florida, you thought that this guy had everything it took athletically, the way he moved, the size. He's about 240. You thought this guy was going to be an all-pro linebacker. And he's with his, third or fourth team. He's never really been able to become a starter. I'm being honest, Geoff, I don't know. But the guy is a physically gifted athlete. And
he's on a 1 year veteran minimum deal. So they'll start.
Maybe it finally works with the Giants. I don't know. But the guy is physically gifted.
I know the Lions talked to them when they had him. He can blitz, like that's the one thing he can do. But yeah, Greg's right. It's kind of been a guy you scratch your head. Why has it not happened? But
he's an enigma wrapped in a riddle.
That's right. I've heard that before.
But this is like 10 to 15 years after thinking the same things about Ernie Sims, another former Lions linebacker. All right, cool. So let's get back into the secondary. You like Deonte Banks, a guy who, I'm sure they drafted to start and hope to be able to start. They've got some pretty good guys in their secondary, Greg.
Sure do.
Adoree Jackson and, of course, the safety Xavier McKinney.
Good player.
Again, it must be something about if you're a Giant, you're going to get hurt. But he had the whole ATV accident with the fingers thing, but he's a good player, right?
And again, he fits Martindale because he can pretty much do everything. You can play him in the slot if you want to at times. You can play him on the back end. You can play him in the box. He can blitz. He can play the run. He can cover. He's a really good football player. It'll be an interesting battle at nickelback, I think, between Darnay Holmes and Cordell Flott, two guys who I really liked, coming out. Flott came in of LSU. He's only about 175, 180 pounds, but he's a really good player. Holmes is, he played outside in college. The Giants have used him since he came in the league in the slot. They still have Aaron Robinson. I mean, they've got a ton of depth on the back end. A ton of. They've got
Amani Owarie, who comes over from the Lions, who has started games.
Oh, a ton of games. And he's got size, he's got length. He just, he got beat a lot. I mean, ultimately, that's going to get you sat down. You get beat a lot at corner. Dane Belton from Iowa played snaps last year at safety and did well. They have a lot of depth on the back end.
Yeah, and if I'm reading the tea leaves of some of their press conferences, I think that they felt they found something a little bit in Jason Pinnock as a reserve. They had to play him quite a bit.
He played a lot too. So, it's going to be really interesting how all this plays out. But I'm sure they want Banks to start opposite Adoree Jackson. That's the way in an ideal world they would like it to be.
Absolutely. All right. Let us do what we did last time. We've gone through the offense. We've gone through defense. We'll talk a little bit about how this team matches up specifically against the Eagles in a second. First, we're going to, of course, tell you about our friends at phlsportsnation.com, enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at phlsportsnation.com, and on Twitter, it's at phlsportsnation. We'll pause real quick for a word from some other great sponsors, including our friends at Sky Motor Cars.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schiller, make sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
And if you stop into Sky Motor Cars out there in Westchester, PA, make sure you tell them Adam and Geoff sent you. You will get a great deal. So, football.
Well, Adam wanted to discuss the long snappers, so let's.
Let's do that.
Casey Kreider, who's been around for a while.
Greg, I expect a full breakdown. Does he stand tall or does he squat short?
Gotta be able to squat.
No, football is a funny thing, right? Because the Giants were a better team than Washington last year, and I think Washington beat the Eagles and gave them a tough game that second game. Of course, every time the Eagles played the Giants though last year, the Eagles just flattened them, and sometimes it becomes a game of matchups. Greg, do you think that the Giants are better equipped? What do the Giants have to do better to match up better against the Eagles this year?
Well, I think the Giants have to throw the ball better, overall. I mean, look, last year, they really were not a passing team. I mean, Daniel Jones did not have many games at all where he threw a lot. I remember it wasn't until the Minnesota regular season game where they really kind of turned Jones loose. And he actually played very, very well in that game. That game was also, I believe, in Minnesota, and they won that game in the regular season. So I think, ultimately the Eagles defense is such that you can't really try to just line up and run the ball. And I think their pass game, I don't want to say it hurt them. I mean, look, I spoke earlier about Jones, and I like Daniel Jones, and I think he will meaningfully improve, but he didn't really put up numbers last year. Their pass game did not have numbers. And granted, they didn't have people either. It's not just Jones. Yeah. They didn't have people. They didn't have wide receivers. I think their O-line was clearly a work in progress. They were not really equipped offensively, Geoff, to play against an Eagles defense last year.
I think that's fair.
In all areas, not just the quarterback. I don't want it to make it seem like this was Daniel Jones' fault. They were just not equipped to play against a defense.
They played to they played to their strength last season. They just didn't have the help at wide receiver enough at tight end, and now you bring all these guys back. And by the way, the second game, remember Barkley didn't play. The Giants they clinched their playoff spot, so they rested a lot of players. But clearly, the Eagles have the better roster, the better quarterback right now. We'll see what happens, but I think, and we'll get obviously to Dallas and the Eagles in future shows, but man, these first two teams we've talked about, the Commanders and Giants, their rosters are better than they were last season.
They are.
Yeah. And we do know the Giants had by the way, we should mention this. Nobody does a better job, I think, unless you've seen someone better, Greg, and you can let me know. Does any coordinator do a better job of getting a free rusher to the quarterback on just a 4-man rush than Martindale? That's like the key that's the backbone of what he's trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, he's really good. I mean, it's one of the things when I do the matchup show, and you see a free hitter, which you don't see very often in the NFL. So often I have to watch those plays over and over and over again, because the last thing I want to do is do a play where somebody screwed up, because you really have to try to get a feel for protections. And sometimes you don't know the answer, because sometimes protections are called by, the center, 8 seconds before the ball snapped, and you don't know what he's calling,
Right.
So, but no, they do. Martindale's been really good through the years with overload concepts, showing overload from one side, then coming from the other side, understanding. He may understand pass protections of offenses as well as any D coordinator in the league, because that's what you're attacking. You're not attacking the quarterback. You're attacking protections.
Yeah, and they really struggled at times, even with that, to stop the Eagles' passing game. And then once it got out of hand, then they got tired and couldn't stop the running game. So it was a perfect storm for the Eagles against them.
And the other thing, you're also trying to create matchups. That's the other thing, because normally I had a great conversation when I did the book, The Games That Changed the Game, with Ron Jaworski, with Dick LeBeau. And Dick LeBeau always used to talk about, in the NFL, it's hard to get free hitters. So you're trying to create matchups. LeBeau would always talk to me about getting his best edge rusher, a linebacker on a running back. You're trying to create matchup. So it might be a D lineman. Maybe you want to get a great pass rusher on the weakness of the offensive line. I mean, that's what teams try to do with what they do with their pressures, because in the NFL, you don't often get free rushers.
No doubt about it. All right. Well, we look forward to these games. The Eagles-Giants games this year, I think, are going to be a little more competitive, and will certainly fun. We have fun breaking them down. So 2 down now, 2 to go. We've done Washington. We've done New York. We come back with our next pod. Greg Cosell will rejoin us, and we will do the Dallas Cowboys before we finish it off with an in-depth look at the Philadelphia Eagles in the final installment of this series. So, Greg, thanks again for all your great coverage and analysis. Greg Cosell, Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been watching Inside the Birds, and as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the bird.